appreciate you all taking the time to come in today and join us for this informative webinar. I hope everyone had an amazing weekend. And, I hope back to school season is treating everyone well. I know it's hectic, but I hope everyone is getting through it and, enjoying the last little bits of warm weather, inshallah, that we're getting. Um, Given the back to school season, as a group, we thought it'd be great to, have a webinar about RESPs and, saving for education. As we all know, things are getting more and more expensive. Um, and we want to ensure that people are informed and have the necessary tools to fund education, right, and help their children or their beneficiaries reach that higher level, and inshallah reach their educational and career goals. So just a breakdown. We'll be talking about RESPs, the tax benefits of them, the government grants, as well as the investment potential there. And we'll kind of walk through piece by piece. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and I will get them addressed, either as we go or at the end, during our Q&A session. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick disclaimer here. Everything here is for educational purposes only. Please do not take this information as financial advice. If you are looking for more of a personalized opinion or advice on your unique situation, please feel free to reach out individually, and we'd love to have more of a one-on-one conversation with you. So just a quick agenda. We'll go through, just a little bit about us at Sharia Portfolio. We'll talk about the education costs and trends. We'll do a quick introduction into RESPs, walk through, the grants and the tax benefits, as well as other savings accounts that can be used for education. And then we'll have a Q&A, and some direction on how to get started or have a more personalized conversation with one of us at Sharia Portfolio. So just a quick breakdown about us. First off, my name is Ali Ladak. I am a representative here with Sharia Portfolio based in Vancouver, but we do have advisors, all across the country. Some background about the company itself. Sharia Portfolio is a full service investment management firm that's dedicated to Sharia compliant investing. So we are Canada's only licensed portfolio management firm that's fully dedicated to Sharia compliant investing. We are licensed in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec. And we were founded in the US back in 2003. And our USA affiliate is licensed with the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, in the US. So let's jump right into post-secondary trends. As we all know, things are getting more and more expensive, right? And more difficult to afford, right? With the cost of living going up, so is the cost of education. As you can see over the last 15, 20 years here, dating back to 2006 all the way to 2023, tuition costs have essentially jumped from 4,400 to close to 7,000 for post-secondary education, right? And if we look at some averages here, a four-year university degree costs just under $100,000 for students in residence, as well as just under 50,000 for students living at home, right? On top of that, an executive master's or MBA, on average is just above $50,000, and a regular MBA, on average is roughly around $30,000 per Statistica Canada. And of course, there's more, right? On top of just tuition, you know, people are left with food costs, housing costs, the cost of textbooks, transportation, utilities, right? As well as, technology such as a laptop or computer, all of which are additional expenses, right? So things are becoming increasingly difficult, and we want to make sure, you are prepared for these costs, of course, right? So how do you save, right? And many of you have probably already heard of an RESP, many haven't, and that's totally okay. But an RESP is a registered education's savings plan, and this is specifically in Canada, and it consists of government grants, investment growth, and tax benefits. So we'll kind of talk about each. So first off, what is an RESP, right? An RESP is a savings account dedicated to help fund a child's post-secondary education. So there's a lifetime contribution limit to this account of $50,000 per beneficiary. And by beneficiary, I'm referring to perhaps your child or whoever's education, inshallah, you're planning to fund. It consists of grants, including the CESG, CLB, BC grant, Quebec grant, all of which we will talk about on the webinar here. And funds can be used for eligible programs and schools, as well as they do include some tax benefits, which we'll, of course, talk about as well. So what type of RESP plans are there? So there's an individual RESP plan for an individual beneficiary or child. You can also open up for someone who's not related to you, right? There's a family RESP plan. So this is an option, if you have more than one child or more than one beneficiary, which we'll talk about, and savings can be shared among these children or beneficiaries. There's also group RESP plans. We're not going to talk about group RESP plans today, as we only offer individual and family RESP plans. But these are offered by non-taxable entities such as foundations, right? So individual RESPs. So in an individual RESP, only one beneficiary or child is permitted. So the subscriber, and when I say subscriber, I'm referring to the one who is funding the RESP, such as a parent or the relative or whoever it is that's making the contributions to the RESP. So the subscriber does not need to be blood or adoption related, right? So who can open up an individual RESP, right? So because the subscriber can be non-related, individuals such as parents, relatives, or even friends can open an individual RESP for a beneficiary or child, right? So for example, if a married, husband and wife have only one child, they can open up an individual RESP for that child. And now leading into a family RESP. So one or more beneficiaries or children are permitted in the account. The beneficiaries must be connected by blood or adoption to the subscribers. So for example, if you're a parent, with multiple children, or if, you've adopted multiple children that are, you're their, caregiver or legal guardian, those can, you can open up a family RESP for them, right? So the big thing about family RESPs is that funds can be split between the beneficiaries, and we'll kind of open up a little bit about this. So the grants cannot be split, which we'll touch about, but contributions can. So, for example, in a family RESP, Adam and Zara have 3 children, which are 8, 4, and 2. They want to make sure that they start saving for each of their education, but are unsure how many will go to post-secondary or which program they will be enrolled in. Some programs might be more expensive, and what if one doesn't attend, right? So what can they do with a family RESP, right? So one, they can open up the family RESP with all 3 children or beneficiaries. you can adjust the weightings based on contributions. So for example, like, if you have three children, you can set it evenly to, 33.3% each, or you can have one which is more, one with less. And by doing so, you can leverage, the more expensive programs with more funding, right? So, for example, if the 8-year-old, attends medical school, right? Medical school is obviously more expensive than um, a separate post-secondary. You can allocate more money to that child particularly, right? With the family RESP. So it does allow for a lot of flexibility, right? And also, on the flip end, say one child doesn't attend post-secondary, right? Say the 8-year-old doesn't go to post-secondary, right? But you've contributed to their RESP, no problem. Those funds that you've contributed can be spread to the following two children, right? To use those funds as well, rather than having to close an individual RESP or deal with, whatever tax consequences that may be involved with the individual RESP if the child does not attend. So it does allow for a lot more flexibility and, some changes that can be made, within the account relative to having an individual RESP. So now let's get into the grants. So the most popular grant, those that know, what an RESP is, have probably heard of the CESG, or the Canada Education Savings Grant, right? And this is probably this is the biggest grant. It's a federal government one. So the federal government matches 20% of contributions up to $500 per year, up to $7,200 per beneficiary, right? So let's get into, some of the specifics. So who's eligible, right? So the beneficiary, must be a resident of Canada, with a valid SIN number, and the account is available, or the grant is available up until the end of their calendar year, of 17, right? The grants can be used towards, universities and colleges in post-secondary, as well as trade schools, apprenticeships, technology institutes, etc., as well as other eligible institutions. We get many questions. Okay, my child is attending an international school or going out of country, right? What do we do? So many international schools or other eligible institutions are eligible for the CESG, but it's extremely important to check with the RESP provider and the CRA to ensure that institution is eligible, for their child to receive the grant. So how does it work, right? So you have your child, or the beneficiary's birth, right? So contributions room starts for the CESG accumulating until they reach 17 from the day of birth, and the annual limit is $500 per year, and 20% of the first 2,500 per year. So the like I said in the beginning, the government grant or matches 20% up to $500, right? So if you were to contribute $2,500 for that year, you would receive the full 20% or $500, in CESG grants, right? So you can accumulate CESG grant, up to $7,200 per beneficiary, maximum, which 20% of 36,000 is 7,200. So if you were to contribute, 36,000 during, over, the lifetime of the child up to 17, you would receive, the full $7,200 in grants. Lower income households may also be eligible for additional funding. It's important to check with your RESP provider, just to see if you are eligible for the lower income funding as well. So, many people ask, like, okay, like, that sounds great, but I'm starting an RESP late, right? Can I make up for the lost years with the grants, right? And the answer is yes, you can, right? 1 year at a time. right? So for example, if you open up an RESP for a 5-year-old, right? So, and you contribute in year five, $2,500, right? You'll receive, the $500 grant for year five. You can also make up 1 year at a time. So in year five, you contribute $2,500 for year five. You'll also contribute $2,500 to make up one lost year, right? To receive the additional grant, right? The following year, you'll contribute $2,500 for year six, another $2,500 for the past year two, right? Which is being made up. The following year, the same thing, year seven, making up year three, the following year, year eight, and making up year four to catch up on, unused CESG grant. So short answer, yes, you can make up, the CESG grants if you have, opened up an RESP late. So the next one, the Canada Learning Bond, or the CLB. So this is an additional incentive up to $2,000 to help low-income families deposit into their RESP, right? From Employment and Social Development, ESDC Canada, sorry. So how are you eligible for this CLB, right? So the beneficiary, again, must be a resident of Canada with a valid SIN, right? The grant is available up until the end of the calendar year they turn 17. They must be born after January 1, 2004. That's when the CLB grant started, and be from a low income family. And I've attached a chart here, that shows, the qualifications for a low income family, right? And if you would be eligible, right? And again, of course, I'll keep on repeating myself. It's really important to check with your RESP provider, to make sure that you've applied for these grants and, to see your eligibility criteria and to ensure that, you're receiving the relevant grants in your RESP account. So how does the CLB work, right? So number one, the beneficiary meets the eligibility requirements. An RESP is opened, right, and valid. The beneficiary receives $500 for the first year, right, and $100 for each eligible year up until the age of 15, with a lifetime maximum of $2,000 deposited into their RESPs. Next is the BC Training and Education Savings Grant, the BCTESG. Maybe it's easier to just say the whole name out loud. And so this is an additional incentive up to $1,200 for residents of British Columbia, through the BCTESG. So who's eligible, right? So parents or the subscriber and beneficiaries or child are residents of BC, right? The child is born after 2006. The child is named the beneficiary for the RESP with a valid SIN, and you can apply when the child is between 6 and 9 years old. How it works. So of course, the beneficiary meets the eligibility requirements. The RESP is opened, right? The parents or guardian apply through the financial institution where the RESP is, right? And they apply when the beneficiary is between 6 and 9 years old. And then the beneficiary or the RESP account, receives the $1,200 in British Columbia government grants. Lastly, for residents of Quebec, we have the Quebec Education Savings Incentive, right? This is a tax measure that encourages Quebec families to start investing early for post-secondary education for their children or beneficiaries. So eligible beneficiaries can receive up to $3,600, from the QESI. So who's eligible, right? So, the beneficiary must be under 18, right? Have a valid SIN, be a resident of Quebec on December 31st of that taxation year, right? Special requirements do apply if the child is 16 or 17 at the end of taxation year, and the child is named a beneficiary for the RESP. So how does it work? If you are eligible, right, you will receive a grant equaling 10% of your annual RESP contributions, up to $250 in grants per year, with a lifetime maximum of $3,600 per child, right? And this credit or grant is deposited into the RESP. There is also additional QESI, right? Depending on the income of your household, you can also earn an extra 5 to 10%, of the first $500 you contribute each year, meaning that low and middle income families could also receive an additional $50 per year, right? If they are to make that full contribution. So now kind of stepping away from the grants, talking about taxation and the tax benefits of an RESP, right? So are contributions to an RESP tax deductible? So direct contributions are not tax deductible, unlike an RRSP, but generated investment income and gains, dividends, etc., are not taxed while they remain in the plan. So when making a withdrawal, right, who pays the tax? Where does the tax go? Right. So grants and government contributions. And when I refer to grants and government contributions, I'm referring to educational assistance programs, EAPs, right? Essentially is what they called. Are taxable. So these grants are taxable at the hand of the student, not the one that made the contribution, right, or the parent. So typically RSPs contains funds that were accumulated by contributions that are made by you, the subscriber, which are not taxable. These are after tax dollars already. Investment gains, which are taxable, and government grant income, which are taxable, but both at the hand of the student, right? So there is a tax benefit there. And I'll share an example here. So for example, Adam makes $200,000 per year and his tax rate is 37%. This is just a hypothetical example. I'm not sure what the tax rate actually is at that income level, right? His son is now 18 and attending college, right? He has maxed out his RESP contributions of $50,000, and the value of the account is now $80,000 from grants as well as market gains. And his son is currently unemployed, right? So number one, Adam wouldn't be able to deduct the $50,000 in contributions, right, from his income. But when withdrawing the capital gains and the EAPs or the grants, these will be taxed at the son's rate, right, which is much lower since he is unemployed. Going back, Adam's tax rate is 37%. The son is unemployed, so his tax rate is going to be much, much less, right? So it's taxed at the hand of the student, not the subscriber. So kind of continuing with, withdrawing from your RESP, we'll touch upon, okay, what are eligible expenses? How much can I withdraw? What if my child doesn't go to post-secondary, or what if they take a break, right, in between? So you can start withdrawing your funds when the beneficiary has graduated high school and enrolled in a post-secondary institution, right? Going back to, earlier on in the presentation, we talked about qualifying institutions. You can check with the CRA, what makes a qualifying institution related to, educational costs, right? And what's needed to provide to your RESP institution when making this withdrawal is a proof of enrollment, from the university or the institution, as well as a tuition statement proving that you're enrolled, you're paying tuition. That will allow you to withdraw from the RESP account. And just an important note, going back, just some definitions. So when I refer to subscriber, the subscriber is the one that sets up the RESP and makes the contributions and withdrawals, right? For example, the parent. The beneficiary is the one who's the RESP is for, for example, the child. Post-secondary education, or PSE, I'm referring to withdrawal from the contributions, right? And then EAP, or education assistance payments, is withdrawal from the grants, investment earnings, and government contributions. So, what are the withdrawal limits? So, from the PSE, or the contributions that you made to the RESP, there is no limit on the withdrawals, right? When touching on the EAP, or the investment growth, as well as government grant contributions, There are some limits, right? So the maximum is 8,000 during the first 13 weeks of school or that semester, and $4,000 if the student is part time, right? After the first 13 weeks, there's no limit to the withdrawals, right? So, for example, hypothetically, if you needed $20,000, right, at the beginning of the semester to fund the semester and maybe some whatever costs, housing or whatever it is, you can withdraw $8,000 of government grants, right? And then that remaining 12 would need to be pulled from the contributions that you made to the RESP. After the 13 weeks, then you can withdraw unlimited from each. And what are eligible expenses, right? Going back to one of those first slides that I had of those additional costs, right? On top of tuition, all of these additional expenses, when related to school, actually qualify as eligible expenses, right? Which is awesome, right? So food, housing, books, transportation, utilities like, pencils and pens or whatever it is, as well as technology, like, such as a laptop or whatever it might be, for your child or beneficiary. These are eligible through the RESP, right? So that grant money or whatever it is can be used towards these. It's not just tuition. So, what if the child does not attend post-secondary, right? So, for example, you have your child or beneficiary, you've been contributing to the RESP, they turn 17, 18, they're done with high school, the RESP, has grown. There's a lot of money in there, but now they don't want to attend post-secondary, right? What do you do with all that money, right? So one option is to leverage the family plan. So, those funds can be moved to another beneficiary, right? So, for example, if you have two children, the oldest one graduates high school, chooses not to go to post-secondary, you can use that money towards the younger one, right? That's, still in high school or whatever it might be, right? You can also close the plan. If you do close the plan, grants will need to be repaid, right? And investment earnings will be taxable and subject to further penalties, right? Option three is also to transfer to another registered account, right? So up to 50% of earnings can be contributed to your RRSP, your registered retirement savings plan, if you have room and the beneficiary is at least 10 years old. So other types of savings accounts, right? So while the RESP is great, right, there is, a contribution limit of $50,000, right? You can grow that with investments, but you might need more, right? So what other accounts can you leverage, to fund education or just general savings knowledge, right? So there is the TFSA in Canada, the tax-free savings account, and the non-registered cash account, which we'll touch upon briefly here. So the TFSA, for those that do not know, it's a Canadian regulated savings/investment account where withdrawals and income earned within the account are tax-free, right? So contributions are made with after-tax dollars, right? Meaning you can't deduct your contributions from your income of that year. So it's after-tax dollars. Withdrawals are very flexible, right? You can withdraw as much as you want anytime for whatever reason, right? So making it suitable for both short-term and long-term goals, right? Many people use for the TFSA for a variety of reasons, right? Whether that be saving for education, saving for a car, saving for Hajj, in short term, or many people use it for an emergency fund, right? Just to kind of sit and grow, or save it for the long term, save it for retirement, right? So it's super super flexible, right? Based on whatever goals you have that for that account, and unused contribution room carries forward, right? TFSA limits start after the age of 18, right? So you must be a Canadian resident to open up a TFSA. The government sets a yearly contribution limit. So in 2025, that contribution limit is $7,000, right? Again, contributions are made with after-tax dollars, right? The account can be invested, right? So you can invest the TFSA, into stocks, sukuks, REITs, right? So inshallah, it does grow, right? And number five, there's unlimited withdrawals, right? And contributions are added back, you know, for the following year. And just to kind of brief breakdown, of okay, like what is the TFSA contribution limit, right? So if you turned 18, in the year 2009, right, your contribution limit, in 2023 would be $88,000, right? In 2024 and 2025, contribution limits were 7,500 and 7,000. So, you'd be nearing, $100,000 in contribution, right? So it's a super great account, especially because, contribution room does carry forward, right? If you haven't contributed since you turned 18, you have that contribution room from the time you're 18. Of course, if you are eligible, at the time and now, for a TFSA. Lastly, we have a non-registered cash account, right? So this is essentially just a basic savings account. There's no particular tax benefits here, but you can use this money to invest and save, right? So money can be invested, right, into stocks, sukuks, ETFs, REITs, whatever it might be. There are unlimited withdrawals, right? And similar to the TFSA, because it's so flexible, it's suitable for both short-term and long-term savings, right? If you're saving for education, Hajj, car, home, whatever it is in the short term, it's a great account, as well as, for additional funds that you're saving for retirement or an emergency fund. It's super great, right? And the one differentiator to the TFSA, other than the tax benefits, is you can have a joint non-registered account, right? So for example, if you and your spouse, would like to have a joint, account, have that money invested, you can have a joint non-registered account, unlike the TFSA. So I'll leave the floor open, for questions. I hope I was able to cover a fair bit. I know it's a lot of talking on my end, but I hope the information, is helpful and, allows you to make more informed decisions. One thing we did not talk about is the investment potential of an RESP, right? We talked about the grants, we talked about the tax benefits, but another big portion, right, is that money can be invested, right? It's not just about the grants, right? And because you're investing for the long term, or post-secondary education, hypothetically, if you start when the child is born, you have 17 or 18 years, right, of potential investment growth in the RESP that you can make, right, to help fund this education as well, on top of the grants, on top of the tax benefits, right? I didn't want to overwhelm everyone by talking too much, about the investment side of things. Of course, ShariaPortfolio is an investment management firm, so if you do have personalized questions or concerns about investments, or kind of where to go with that, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'd be happy to assist. With the Q&A, for those that attended a little later, feel free to leave your questions in the chat. I did have some popular questions that often get asked that I'll kind of walk through. I hope this answers a decent bit of it, but of course, like I said, if you do, feel free to leave them in the chat. I do see a couple here that I will address quickly. I want to transfer my child's RESP from TD. Would you reimburse the $150 charge that TD charges? Also, what's the breakdown of the portfolio in the RESP? Can we choose the breakdown between SPRE, SPTE, etc.? So great question. When it comes to the reimbursement, I'd rather talk to you about that personally and see if there's anything that we can do. Um, so please do reach out after the call. Um, when it comes to the breakdown of the portfolio, okay, so like I mentioned, things are invested, right? So at ShariaPortfolio, I'll give a quick breakdown, but a more one-on-one conversation would be very helpful. We have structured portfolios that range from conservative all the way to aggressive, right? And in our passive accounts, or for accounts under 100,000, right, $100,000, oftentimes RESPs fall into this category, right? Each portfolio from conservative to aggressive is broken down with not only the three ETFs but also five, right? So SPUS, SPRE, SPTE, SPSK, and SPWO, right? So each portfolio has a separate allocation, and is managed based on market conditions to suit the needs or the goals of that portfolio. For example, conservative, we're going to have a lot less risky, plays per sure. And in the aggressive, we're taking some higher risk, for higher returns, right? And then between there, we have aggressive, growth, moderate, income, and conservative, right? And when it comes to choosing, the breakdown, the portfolios are structured and managed themselves, but the most important thing about investing is to understand you and understand your goals for each account, right? So if you were to become a client, we would go through some significant KYC, or it's called Know Your Client, to ensure that we have the relevant information we need, to provide a professional recommendation as to how should this account be invested, right? And of course, this is communicated and discussed with you to ensure that we come to an agreement, based on your goals. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Anything that we do on the client facing front is super transparent. So you would see the breakdowns and, get an understanding of, okay, how is this invested? Um, I appreciate the feedback. Lots of good info. Can you share the slides, as we did not catch anything? Yes, this webinar is recorded. So we will send out the recording, and I know the marketing team is also working on like kind of a book, for or a deck for RESPs that we'll share with our clients as well. Um, Highlighting all of this information. My contact details, yes, I will provide these. Just at the end, I'll walk through some questions that are kind of popular, that I want to make sure are addressed, right? So number one is, do RESPs, excuse me, do RESPs expire if the beneficiary is late to attend post-secondary, right? So for example, if they take gap years or something in between, right, what happens? So there's no specific age limit, right? But beneficiaries must start using the funds within 36 years of when the plan is opened, right? So for example, if you opened it when the child was born, by the time the child turns 36, right? So essentially from 17 or 18 when they graduate high school to 36, is when that plan needs to start being used, right? How do you register for these grants, right? The CSG, the CLB, the provincial grants, whatever. So typically this is done through the financial institution, right? But it's always important to make sure, right? And talk to your advisor or whoever it might be, and just confirm, okay, am I applied for these grants, right? And make sure that your paperwork is completed, of course, and ask the necessary questions, right? So, for example, if you were to open up an RESP, with ShariaPortfolio, grants would be automatically applied for, right? And you would see this on your paperwork, upon signing and opening up your account. So how do I make the most of an RESP? Okay, so hypothetically, right? Okay, number one is to open the account early, right? So this way you're not having to catch up on late funds, right? As well as, because the account is invested, right? The more time in the market, typically yields the most returns, right? Leverage the right plan, right, between an individual and a family plan, right? If you do have multiple children, a family plan, can be good, right? Just so you have that flexibility in case one child doesn't go, or in case you have different circumstances where one child is attending a higher, um, a more expensive program, or whatever it might be, right? So make sure that you leverage the right plan. Number three, of course, is to max out your contributions, right? Max out your contributions, take advantage of the grants, right? These grants are all applied based on contributions, right? So in order to receive 100% of the grant, you need to make 100% of the contribution to yield that grant, right? So for example, the CESG, matches 20%, up to $500, right? So 20% of 2,500 is $500, right? So to get 100% of that grant, you should invest $2,500 per year, right? To take advantage of that, right? Number four is to make sure that you're right in the right investments, right? Kind of going back to what I said about the know your client and understanding your goals, right? It's really important to be like, okay, like what's my timeline? What's my risk tolerance? Can I yield higher returns because I have a long-term time horizon, right? So for example, like I said, if you open up an RESP, when the child is born, you have 17 years, right? Until the child attends post-secondary, and 17 years where you can take investments and yield higher returns, inshallah. And then of course, just make sure that you're taking advantage of the grants, right? Make sure that you're applied, make sure that you're seeing them in your account, and make sure things are running smooth. Some resources that you can use. The government of Canada, of course, has all the information that you need, on education plans. Obviously, you don't need to follow the link, but even if you just Google search Government Canada RESP, the correct link will show up where you can provide, all that, where you can access all that information. So here is the contact information. You can scan the QR code to get started. That this 905 number is, the general number for the firm. If you are looking to speak with me personally, I ask that you please just send me an email at ali@shariaportfolio.ca, and I will gladly, set up a time to chat with you and, talk about your goals and, what's the necessary steps, for you. Another question came in. How is your firm Sharia compliant versus any other RESP broker in the market? So, great question. Um, so, ShariaPortfolio itself is an investment management firm that's dedicated to Sharia compliant investing. So, in the RESP, right, you have three things. You have your contributions, right? You have the grants, which are, they're not interest or anything like that, right? They are just grants from the government. And these funds are invested, right? So the Sharia compliance side of things comes in to the investments, right? So anything that we are invested in passes a specific Sharia screen, right? Meaning that any stocks or ETFs that we hold for our clients, right? Pass a Sharia screen. And the Sharia screen that we follow is governed by AOFI, which is the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. And they set out the standards of what makes a company Sharia compliant or not. And, really quickly, the breakdown of that kind of goes as, okay, there's no haram sources, right? So we don't invest in any alcohol, weaponry, gambling, entertainment, etc., the basics, as well as no interest-based businesses, right? And there's a couple financial ratios that fall into play there. So no more than a 30% debt to capital ratio, because we don't want to invest in overly leveraged companies that are paying interest, right? And then as well as no more than a 30% cash to capital, so companies that are collecting interest on their cash. There's some stuff that goes into that. I don't want to talk forever here and give you the whole breakdown, but we do have a lot of webinars here on Sharia compliance and kind of how we invest. I'd encourage you to look at those, as well as reach out to me for an individual conversation as well, where I can kind of give you the breakdown. But with that, I don't see any other questions. Like I said, I do hope that you guys enjoyed, and I was able to provide some good information here. We figured it was the right time, given back to school and everything like that. And as mentioned, if you have questions or you want to have a more one-on-one conversation with myself, or anyone here at the firm, feel free to reach out, right? And we'd love to chat and see how we can support your financial goals as well. Management fees. So in our passive accounts, our management fee is 0.5% annually. And when I refer to passive, this is accounts under 100,000. But with that, I'll leave it there. I hope you guys, have a, oh, so, okay. So over 100K, management fees start at 1.5%. Over 100K, accounts are put in what's called our active service, right? And our active service differs from our passive, where we use what's called a core satellite strategy. Again, passive is strictly ETF based, right? Active is when you get into more individual stock positions, as well as some ETF positions, which allows for a lot more flexibility and personalization in your account. So they start at 1.5%, up to from 100 to half a million, and then they decrease gradually after that. Are only Canadian stocks traded? No, no. We have a breakdown of primarily U.S. stocks actually, as well as Canadian holdings, and as well as global holdings, right? So companies outside of North America, right? So they are very well diversified between Canada, the U.S., as well as global, right? For you, for us in Canada. Yeah. So like I was saying, no, you're not restricted to Canadian stocks only. We actually primarily hold US, right? As well as allocation to Canadian holdings, as well as global holdings outside of North America too, right? So like I said, a lot of diversification that's actively managed by a portfolio management committee. A team of portfolio managers with the firm who manage these models. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Um, but again, I appreciate everyone taking the time, and I hope to, speak with each and every one of you individually, should you have some questions or concerns come up. And as mentioned, you can reach me at Ali at ShariaPortfolio.ca. I'll put it in the chat one more time. And we are happy to help and assist, where we can. But yeah, with that, I will leave the webinar there. I hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful, rest of your day. All right, take care. Assalamu alaikum and